Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Kaine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses, I appreciate your service. This is a question for Secretary Kendall and General Brown. We had a hearing last week with Secretary Hicks, and she frankly talked about the challenge. It's an obvious challenge in determining the best way to get from the force we have to the force we want to have in 2030. This kind of mid-period transition is a challenge. When I hear phrases like divest to reinvest, I'm not skeptical about that. You have to do it. But I tend to think about them in the kind of through the lens of workforce, being chair of the Readiness Subcommittee. And as you make this transition, it can be particularly challenging on our specialized workforces, shipbuilding, aircraft production, certain electronic components. Do you think the FY23 budget and the fed-up projections for procurement adequately address the sustainment of the few remaining manned aircraft production lines in the United States?
I do, Senator. We're continuing production on the F-35, not quite at the rate that we were at before. We're trying to wrap up production of the F-15EX for the next 2 or 3 years, 2 years. And so we're actually accelerated, increased the rate there in order to do that more quickly. I can't think of any other example. KC-46, we're continuing with that production line. So generally speaking, we are continuing at a rate which we think will support the industrial base and allow them to support us going into the future.
Great. General Brown?
Senator, I would agree. And the thing I also think about is the fact that we are, I don't allow my staff to talk about divest to invest. It's how we make the transition from where we are today to get to the future. And so we've got to make sure we're still working in procurement and then still maintaining capability to support today's operations. At the same time, we make sure we are not taking undue risk that's going to impact us in the future. So it's a combination of those two that come together.
Thank you. Now for Secretary Kendall and General Raymond, I want to ask about the space domain. It's getting crowded up there. Many nations have assets in space that have a defense or military purpose. The commercial platforms in space just proliferate dramatically. And they can have an impact upon defense missions. We've seen what Starlink has done in terms of providing internet service in Ukraine. So these commercial platforms have a security dimension to them as well. And then the third thing we got to worry about in space is debris. So one of my favorite government publications is NASA's Orbital Debris Quarterly. And the debris can be accidental debris, or it can be debris that's actually created to jeopardize other assets in space. It seems like an area where we have to do a lot to keep our platform safe, but there's also probably need for more rules of the road on an international level to try to protect these very expensive assets in space. So talk a little bit about how, from the DoD perspective, you're focusing on the protection of our assets in space and whether there are international rules of the road that we should be considering to try to make sure that all these assets are protected.
Well, Senator, one rule that we recently talked about is the one the Vice President discussed recently on the norm prohibiting the type of destructive tests that the Russians conducted recently, which was very irresponsible. They created large fields of debris. General Raymond can talk about the numbers of objects we're currently tracking up there as a result of that one test. So we've got to get people to agree not to do that. That puts everything we have in space in low Earth orbit particularly at risk. There are other norms that we've talked about with regard to proximity operations and so on. And the National Space Council, I think, has been working on some of these to try to get wider appreciation of the need to have things that allow us all to operate in space as a commons and to do so to the benefit of every nation, frankly. And General Raymond, I think, will have more to say about that.
So you're absolutely right that space is becoming more congested, more contested, more competitive. If I were to testify in front of you 2 years ago, I'd have said we were tracking about 22,000 objects. Today, we're probably tracking close to mid-40,000 objects. If I'd have said 2 years ago the numbers of satellites that we were tracking is about 1,500, today that number is close to 5,000. And the trends are going up. Everybody's proliferating access to space, largely because commercial space has reduced the cost to launch, has enabled a lot more access. That provides us opportunities and it provides us challenges. On the challenges side, we are working really hard to keep the domain safe for all. We act as the space traffic control for the world. We provide warning across the world to keep satellites from colliding. We demonstrate safe and responsible behavior by how we act, and we do so in partnership with our allies and partners. We're committed to keeping the domain safe for all.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Kaine.